Hello. This is another segment of Government Unlocked, and we're doing a follow-up interview with Bill Schmidt and Paul Bolton, who presented to the town of Sandwich at the Center for Active Living on the issue of disaster recovery, both on a domestic level and an international level. Hope you enjoy this. Gotcha. Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank both of you for coming down to Sandwich and making that wonderful presentation to us. It was a cold and rainy day, but I think we all learned a lot. I know I certainly didn't, and I think the feedback I received afterwards was really quite good. People were surprised and concerned,
Yep.
surprised at a lot of the good things that you said about the impact of FEMA and of USAID, but concerned because of the lack of knowledge people have about some of these issues and the impact some of these programs have in benefiting people in their lives. So,
We had a great time. Thanks a lot for having us.
well, it
I
was,
think cold and rainy was a little bit, I think you're underselling that just a little bit that day.
yeah, it was torrential rain. I got it.
Yeah.
But I would like to spend a little time talking about things we didn't talk about during the presentation, because as you know, the presentation is going to be on Sandwich Community Access TV as well as on YouTube. Could you talk a little bit, and we'll start with you, Paul. I know you were involved with USAID. How did that evolve? How did you begin that journey?
I've worked in foreign assistance as an implementer. So for working, I was based in a university, Johns Hopkins University, and I would develop projects, research and programming projects with various NGOs. So, like World Vision, Save the Children, CARE, Venice Relief, etc.
When you were
And
a
I
little
had
boy,
done that
Paul, when you
since.
were a little boy, I bet you didn't decide you were going to do that. How did you end up there?
Oh, you want to go way back?
I want to go back. I want to know how someone
Ancient history.
gets in this position.
Okay. Grew up in a Catholic family. My mother had 9 children. I was raised with, there were seven of us, actually grew up together. My father sold sheep and cattle, so he made very little money. So we were basically, I wouldn't say we were poor or desperate, but most other people had more money than we did. And we grew up in a small town, where there wasn't much going on. And so I had a dream that I would travel the world and not be poor. And my mother had been a nurse, and so said to me, "Why don't you consider a career in medicine?" And I had never thought of that. I thought I might get a chance to go into science. But she convinced me that, that would be a job. If you're a physician or a nurse, you can work anywhere in the world, and you always would make a reasonable salary. So in Australia, we have a big exam, or the state I was in, New South Wales, we have a big exam. And if you do well in the exam, you can go to the university of your choice. And in Australia at the time, there was a means tested university support system, meaning that the less money your family made, the more money the government would pay for you to go to university. So my father made so little money that I got the maximum support. So I got all my fees paid. I had a book allowance. I had a accommodation allowance, the whole thing. So I was able to become a physician. But I always had this idea that yes, I would travel. Yes, I would work as a physician, but I wanted to work with people who I thought, could use help, who wouldn't otherwise do that. And so I was interested in working in low and middle income countries. So after I finished my residency in Australia, I headed out traveling around the world, and I ended up in Thailand and ended up working in a little war hospital, and then ended up working with refugees and displaced people in other countries, um, all supported by, all as part of NGO, different NGOs. Then when I joined the university, that was great because with the university, you couldn't just work with one NGO, you could work with multiple NGOs in multiple countries all at the same time. And a lot of that work, when I moved to the United States, a lot of that work was funded by USAID. So I was very appreciative of the programs, very appreciative of support, and I got to know people at USAID. So in 2020, when they decided that they wanted to have a mental health coordinator, that mental health was a big deal. And I had been working in mental health for a few years before 2020. They offered me the job and I became the mental health coordinator for USAID.
Wow. I'm glad you told us that journey because that's pretty amazing. And how many countries have you been in? Would you?
I've probably been in about 50 and I've worked in, I guess, close to 40 different countries,
That's great. Okay,
including this one.
Bill, can you top this?
No,
Oh,
I'm
yes, you
just thinking I
can.
can't even come close. So, and the nature of FEMA is just, you know, naturally it's only United States and territories of the United States. So, although I've been from Alaska to Florida to Puerto Rico to California in many, many different disasters, but
Well, Bill, I got to take you back though. When you were a little boy, did you say I want to work for FEMA?
no, once again, no. I had went to school for political science. It's funny, both Paul and I are from very large families. I don't know if there's some kind of coincidence there, but I had got school for political science and worked in that field for a while, and then most recently had gone to work for a large, very large international software company and it was awful, terrible. It was soul eating. So meanwhile, I had been volunteering in my town on the Conservation Commission, on the Water Commission. I also was volunteering for the state for a what they call a storm assessment team. So when storms came out, they'd have local people go to kind of look at the damage and give the state itself some kind of idea of how bad things were. And the town that I live in, Situate, is obviously it's kind of famous for its Northeast impact. A lot of times the TV programs film here. So there I was volunteering, doing a lot of the stuff I really loved and really enjoyed. It made me feel whole. And on the other hand, what I was doing to make money was um, driving a hole in my stomach and my soul. So I had applied for FEMA and they were a little bit, like, I don't know, you got to be able to make this transition. So I ended up being a reservist, which means you stay at home and don't get paid until something happens. And then they say, okay, you go to Texas. And so you go to wherever they are and then you keep working until they don't need you anymore. And I had done that a couple times. And then the Region 1, which is in New England, uh, saw fit to hire me to do what I was doing. So I progressed through the ranks there with FEMA in this region. But um, the majority of my time with FEMA was with an IMAT team. So what we would do is go and support other states in their disasters.
It seems like there is a theme between the two of you. You want to make an impact and you do want to help people.
And what has happened recently kind of spurred us both into further action because we were no longer able to do our jobs, no longer able to do the jobs that, and I think I can speak for Paul in this, but he'll let me know. We were no longer the ideal of the positions that we had taken and the reasons behind the jobs that we did we were finding very, very difficult to perform. So
Well,
things changed.
and you certainly touched on it during the presentation you made, and there were two statistics that came up that really it was very important for me to hear those statistics, and I want to talk about that again today because to me, it was really profound. I think you are absolutely right. I don't know whether it was Bill or Paul who said that 0.87 of our budget our federal budget goes to disaster. Um, I'm sorry, to foreign aid. And
Right.
uh, I think you were absolutely spot on when you said most people think it's a lot more than that.
Mhm.
And I think that's important for people out there to really know that less than 1% of the federal budget goes to foreign aid. And it makes a tremendous impact, not only in the lives of the people, but in the reputation of the United States among other countries.
Yeah, I think the important, but Paula, to talk to that point, but the reason that we both kind of joined up to try to talk to different communities about the impacts is no one is fully cognizant, and it's hard. It's a challenge because our the way that we get for information is so siloed that people don't understand the interwoven connectivity of all the things that are happening now. What's happening for USA aid has a direct impact not only on people's direct on people's lives and livelihood, but it also spins back all the way to our local communities. The net that USA Aid throws is a very wide and very impactful one, and it's heartbreaking to see what's happening.
Paul, could you give us one example that really struck you in your travels and working with USAID, where the work of USAID really was transformative in a community or in an individual? One that you think about and it really impacted you.
I guess the ones that come to mind more recently are because I worked in mental health. We developed with USAID funding, we developed ways of addressing comorbidity of mental health in ways that hadn't existed before. What I mean by that is that here in the United States, somebody might have depression or they might have anxiety. They might have post-traumatic stress if they've experienced something terrible, or they might have substance abuse. Um, but overseas, in places where there's both poverty and disasters, and as Bill can tell you, disasters usually occur amongst the poorest populations, right? People live in the areas where disasters strike because the
Not
land is
because they
cheap.
choose to or
That's where
can
they
afford.
can
Yeah.
live. So when you have people with poverty and disaster and a war, what you frequently get is people who have depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress and substance abuse all in the one person. And we haven't done a great job even in across the world of figuring out how do we help people with mental health, multiple mental health issues. So with funding from USAID, we developed a program based on something that was invented here in the United States. We developed a program in which people who had no more than like a middle school education could learn how to provide treatment to people for multiple disorders. It just didn't exist anywhere else in the world. And even today, no one else has developed this. It's totally a USAID supported project. And when we first started doing this, why that strikes me is that, I mean, I could talk to you about how we did malaria programs, TB programs that save lives, and that is just wonderful, and I could talk forever. But with mental health, it was something where people had no hope. So they felt like, once you had this problem, you were always going to have this problem, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. And so when you go into a community with these kind of interventions and you apply them to people and they work, it's shocking for them. So we would get letters of gratitude and little gifts from people saying like, "This is amazing," and challenging their view that this was fate and it's something that you couldn't do anything about. And what I particularly remember in Uganda was women sending us gifts because we had changed their husbands. Their husbands were no longer abusive, no longer drinking as much, working, treating them better. And they had no idea that their husbands could be like that. And so this happened frequently, and we would get all this appreciation. And again, it was because, yes, we treated people, yes, we helped people, but we did something equally powerful, which is what is that we gave people hope. So going from programs which only a few people came to just because they were desperate to being programs that like lots of people wanted to come in because when the message got out that this is something you could actually do something about, then people wanted it. So that's the one I like that strikes me emotionally because of that added element of we not only helped people, but we gave people hope for something that didn't exist before. Um, and now, at least some NGOs have continued to use that program and they try to get funding from private foundations to support it. So this is something that USAID supported that exists now that still goes that wouldn't have existed if
Well,
USAID hadn't existed.
can NGOs find enough private funding to replace what the federal government was providing?
Oh, no way. Yeah, absolutely not. It's all a matter of scale, right? So if you've got a foundation and they give you some money, you can help some people. The difference was the size of USAID programs was just much greater than almost any foundation. So you could help a lot of people. You could run a much bigger program than, anything you can find from private funding.
So some of those services that that were being provided by NGOs via USAID are gone now.
Yes. One that I'm particularly distressed about is Ukraine.
Could you talk a little
We,
about that?
yeah, the other thing about that program, about mental health interventions in general, and I'm talking about counseling interventions, they're the only group of treatments that I know of, treatments for actual diseases that you can deliver over a telephone line.
Yeah.
So we had counselors that we had trained who had crossed over into Poland or were in the west of Ukraine, where it was relatively quiet, treating people who were hiding in basements under Russian bombardment. So we were projecting treatments into areas for people that nothing else could get in. This was the only thing that we could do for them, but it was helpful. And that became a substantial program under USAID, and now it's just gone. Uh,
And
the war's
the
continued.
fighting has continued. So
Yeah, but the support for that program is gone. The people who were providing the program, I do know that they tried to continue, but they need salaries, they need support for communications, and these are things that they don't get anymore. So that program has really contracted way back, just at the time when the need for it is as much as ever.
yeah. And we're hopefully moving to a stage where the fighting will stop, but the mental health issues that those folks are experiencing are going to go with them into the future. If they've got post-traumatic stress and depression,
Yep.
rebuilding their lives, and USAID's help would have been substantial
Yes.
now and going forward.
Yes, indeed.
Bill, want to talk to you a little bit in a similar fashion about your experiences in addressing one that comes to mind, a disaster that you were involved in where FEMA made a real impact in resolving or at least helping to heal the situation.
The team that I was on, the IMAT team, was at the very, very pointy end of the spear. So we would be there either before or immediately after the disaster. So things, we no water, no food, no that type of thing. Not at the scale that Paul deals with, but there was a large, large scale comparatively immediacy to the needs. So a lot of these communities, as we've already kind of indicated, were poor, I guess is the best way to put it, or under-resourced, greatly under-resourced. And therefore, not really ready or prepared for the amount of damage, 5 feet of water in your house. If it goes up to your second floor, then your house is totaled. And so we were finding a lot of these areas. I mean, when we would go there, the police would say, no, you can't go into that area without an escort. But the once we started to plug into the community, and we talked about this a little bit, there's a certain sense of camaraderie, a certain sense of community that is generated when people and all your neighbors, the people that you grew up with, the people that you live beside, are desperate for help. And there was this one area in North Carolina that they didn't have any structure. And what happens is FEMA will come in, provide these services, but then eventually they have to leave, and the community has to stand up by itself. So what we had to do is go out into the community and say, okay, we need people here to help reconstruct what all the damage. I mean, not only physically, but get people food, get people shelter, start to what we call muck and gut the houses out. And this one little community in North Carolina really, really just rose to the occasion. It was so heartening, to knock on, figuratively knock on people's doors. We go to the hospital, and then the director of that hospital said, use my conference room. We'll have people available for you. Here are the other people in the community that I think could help. It was really, really heartening. And what the thing that both Paul and I are trying to illustrate here is that the resources that we and other people have relied on are no longer going to answer the need. And the idea of individuals, communities, organizations rising to the occasion to meet this need is so imperative. And what we're trying to do is let people know that this is already happening. These impacts are already acute all over the world, but also in our community. I mean, you had asked Paul about NGOs being able to rise to the occasion and fill these gaps. Even home here in Boston, the Greater Boston Food Bank, they asked pretty much the same question to them. And they said, we can't even come close to that. The funding that we got to help people, we'll go to our donors, we'll go to people, we'll do whatever we need to do to raise funds, but we can't even come close to filling that gap. And
Well-
that's going to happen in so many different areas.
So,
And
Bill, let me just ask you,
yes, ma'am.
let's say a hurricane, a Category 5 hurricane hits Cape Cod.
Yep.
What's going to be different?
The difference is that no one, and I say this with conviction, no one knows how the federal government will respond. My former job, but the last one I left, was to coordinate other federal agencies in a FEMA response. So if we needed the Coast Guard, if we needed EPA, we needed Health and Human Services, HUD, all those people, we would I had to maintain contacts with all these people, and we all kind of coordinate our effort. Okay, we need housing here, we need additional food and water stuffs here. We work with the state and the local communities to do all these things. Now we have no idea how FEMA will respond because several things have happened. One is that by the administration's own admission, they are drastically cutting back FEMA funding and grants. But two, they are already making cuts to the staff. FEMA somewhere has lost somewhere around 30% of their staff. And what FEMA has provided traditionally throughout the years is this ability for the states to go to the federal government and say, we've exhausted all of our need, all of our resources, help us with this. Now we don't know if that help will be available. There are statutes and policies that regulate how states get federal assistance and how applies them. But now in this current atmosphere, there's real questions about how all of those policies and procedures will be applied. Will it be a red state? Will it be a blue state? Will the grants have a cost share that are greater than other grants? And very, very quickly, I'll finish up real quickly. When Paul was talking about the loss of the funding and the resources to USAID, the corollary effect there is not only is it the money, but it's the innovation. He was talking about the innovations. These people are scientists on the cutting edge of what they do and also immersed in the field. So that the ideas and the thoughts and the programs that they come up with are generated out of need by these professionals. Then we lose the tracking of the system. So when Paul was saying, how are we tracking, the health of people? Even here in the United States, when I was deploying to New Mexico for the wildfires, and for the first time in my life, I had to worry about a measles vaccine. I mean, we're concerned now about tuberculosis, another rise in tuberculosis, because we have no tracking or reporting that we can count on from our partners at HHS. And then it's not only the innovation, but the improvement of these programs. The methodical improvement and tracking of this program to say, okay, this worked, that didn't work, let's continue on this. All of that's gone. And then, of course, it's the synchronization of all of these people, all of these parts that have come together are no longer synced up because every agency is fighting for its own life and holding on dearly to the staff they have in the hopes that they can at least answer their narrow mission. But that coordinating element and all of that vast experience in disaster response has been lost. So how will that impact Cape Cod? Cape Cod is in a very precarious state in general. As we all know, evacuation in the Cape will be, let's call it a challenge over those two bridges. I mean, we can't even get traffic back and forth on Friday and Mondays. So there's an absolute and unequivocal need for the communities to brace themselves for what they think that they'll need and what they can assume that will not happen at the federal level.
So it sounds to me, what you're saying is the coordination aspect has been depleted.
Unequivocally.
That FEMA was very involved in the coordination of NGOs and state agencies and other federal agencies. And for example, if we had an oil spill down here, EPA would be involved.
Exactly right. And we had a quick response force, and there's 8-10 different agencies, wildlife, Coast Guard. We'd all meet on a monthly basis and talk about scenarios, what worked, what didn't work. We do all these exercises and trainings.
Is
and
that
all of that
now?
To a much lesser degree, much lesser degree. The new administration, so FEMA is now on the third head of FEMA. This just happened yesterday, and they nicknamed her the Terminator because she is grown kind of famous for her cutting of grants and programs, staffing and funding to FEMA.
Was she a FEMA employee beforehand?
She was chief of staff for FEMA. Yep.
Right. Well, obviously, this is all concerning, and I suspect what we're talking about right now is in large part why you went on the road.
Precisely what Paul and I are, by coincidence, happy coincidence, are neighbors, and we were both talking about the concerns that we have at the different levels. So my idea was to say, okay, let's talk about the local impacts and the state impacts and the federal impacts, but then make people aware of the incredible acute issues that are facing us internationally and how and why they're so important to us here. The things that USAID and agencies like those, the improvements that they were making in our international relations, in the health and safety of people all across the world, has direct in. Look at the immigration issues that we're saving now, that we're dealing with now. USAID's and their efforts would have such a positive impact, a continuing positive impact on that.
Right. It would allow people to live in their own countries in a healthier and more satisfying way rather than
Yep.
feeling like they have to leave.
Paul, any immigration kind of corollary there?
Yeah, when I was at USAID, we had a program particularly focused on Central America, and that was actually the part of the focus was to make countries more livable, right? So that they wouldn't feel like people had to leave and come to Mexico and the United States. So that was a fairly well supported and well thought out program, and we thought it was making progress. It's certainly not making progress now.
Oh,
You know, one of the things that came up in your lecture, and I really wanted to spend a little time talking about it, was the need for the dialogue to for us to find common ground. I mean, we all know that we're living in very divisive times. I've got two people sitting with me here today who have dedicated their lives to making sure that people who are dealing with disasters get all the support they need so that they can recover and be healthier. That's an important goal. How do we bring people together? Because I do believe the American people are a caring people. How do we bring people together and find common ground around some of these issues? Because I know that was brought up, and I think
oh.
that hits it right on the head.
And
So it's
Paul and I are working on that now. And I mean, he's much more eloquent than I on this. But so, Paul, take it away. I mean, I do have some key points that I want to hammer home, but I think that you have a much better way of phrasing it there, Paul.
Well, my impression is, in talking to people, more so recently as an advocate, but always in the past, is that I don't think people's values have changed at all.
Yeah.
I don't think they've changed one bit. But what has changed is that now we're divided into separate media bubbles. And so we are operating under different sets of facts. So the same values with one set of facts leads you to one conclusion, and a different set of facts leads you to the opposite conclusion. I try to read and listen to media on all sides. One of the things that the media on the very right and the very left have in common is this need to lock down their audience. And they do so by telling their audience, don't talk to the other side, don't communicate, don't engage with people on the other side. They're evil, they're corrupt, they're stupid, they're selfish. I mean, these are the kind of adjectives they typically use for people who don't agree with them. And I find very much, therefore, a reluctance to do that on both sides. I'm part of a group of former USAID people around the country, but particularly focused in DC. And I'm trying to get people to do what Bill and I are doing, is to reach out to their local communities and talk about this. And my colleagues, they are nervous and they are afraid of the reception that they will get if they try to do this kind of thing. That they're going to get yelled at, they're going to get abused. They just don't think they can take it. And I try to convince them that, this business about half the country, being on one side and half the country being on the other, and it's a myth. The surveys that we have, and I think my own experience backs this up is that it's about 11 or 12% of people who are very MAGA, 11 or 12% of people who are very, ultra left conservative, and that the rest of us are in the middle and distressed and disturbed by this divisiveness, but convinced by the media that it's 50% on each side and that you're not going to get a good reception if you talk to other people. When I've done talks like this, both in person and online, the biggest, most common reaction I get, the most common comment I get is, I've never heard that before. Doesn't matter what I say, it's I've never heard that before. And of course, it's particularly, on people that sort of lean right, more conservative. They say it more often, but people on, what I would regard as the center and the left say the same thing. People are consuming media with different sets of facts, and I think we need to give another view. You know, I think people are smart enough to realize that if they are only consuming one bubble or the other, that they're not getting the other side. So I think it's powerful when Bill and I say, hey, we did this for a living. We lived this. This is your opportunity to hear from somebody who actually did this. I found there's interest and there's curiosity.
And you don't have a vested interest, really. I mean, you're trying
Not
to,
anymore.
yeah, you're trying to give information. And I think that's really important. And, we're going into a season where people gathered together as families. And I'm sure you've heard this. I certainly have, that they're nervous about the holidays and there
Yes.
are certain things we cannot talk.
Don't bring up politics,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
That's not what I'm hearing from you two. I'm hearing from you,
Nope.
we need to talk about it. So
You're absolutely right.
one of the things I'm going to ask you, because I'm hoping this gets on before Christmas, is what do you suggest? We do need to talk about this, but how do we talk about it and bring the temperature down and
Well,
fit
I
from
think that you brought up a really good point because what Paul and I are really emphasizing, and even, when we are lucky enough to be hosted and doing these talks in person, like we did down in Sandwich, we stress that this is a apolitical discussion. This is something that we want to separate from politics and get to a point, a heart, literally the beating heart, the warmth of the conversation. Because there's very, very few people who can listen to the type of things that Paul and I talk about and not be moved and not want to help. So, what can we do? One of the things is that we need to support the local, national, state, international organizations that we respect, that we know are making differences. We need to let them know that we support them, either financially or with a like, or, volunteer. But do something to say, thank you for the impact that you are having. The second thing is it's absolutely imperative. I'm going to turn to Paul after this to let your legislators know what is important to you. Now, there is a kind of a mindset that's saying our legislators, they don't really care about me. I'm only one person. They're hearing from these large companies there. And Paul and I were talking about this, and we try to make sure that we hit this in our, when had the opportunity to talk to communities, is the importance and the resonance of a letter, a personal letter to your legislator saying, this is important to me. We've discussed this before, but when we say, why aren't you doing anything about this, Mr. Legislator? The answer is very clear, very straight. It's because I'm not hearing from my constituents. The only way to solve that problem is to make sure that the constituents let their legislators know that this is an important, above and beyond this, and this. This issue is important to me. Paul, can you talk a little bit about what you talked to about the legislator who said the value of a letter, or I think it was a staffer.
Well, the organization I work with is something called Aid on the Hill. And that is a group of former USAID people who are particularly who are based in DC. So they go out to members of Congress. I think they've reached out to 90 or so. Um, I separately, in my previous work, reached out to probably maybe 10 or 15 members of Congress. And they do all talk about that, about the importance of a letter from their own constituents, because they have the idea that if one person wrote a letter about this, there's probably 100 other people who feel the same way, but who just don't write letters. So even one letter, gets attention. If they get a bunch of letters on the same topic, then the idea is, wow, there's really a lot of people who care about this. And as Bill said, I mean, one of the reasons we don't get more attention on this, both on all sides, both Republican and Democrat, is that they're not hearing about this from their constituents. They think the population has moved on and is now concerned about other things. And we're trying to generate, an interest in this and an understanding, and that to let constituents know, let their representatives know that this is something that people here still care about.
And
And
to that
we
end,
still want action on it.
And we have developed templates if people are interested that we'd be happy to share that they can send to their legislator, and it's kind of a fill in the blank type of thing, but at least it provides a structure. If people want to do something like that, we'd be happy to share it.
Okay, a way of sharing with your legislators. Now I'm going to put you on the spot. You're going to be meeting with Uncle Harry or whatever uncle it is, and you disagree with him totally on these issues. How do you find common ground around the dining room table at Christmas time? Because I hear that all the time from folks that they're dreading going to Uncle Harry's house because Harry's got strong feelings about things in the world, and you don't agree with Harry. Because I think,
I'm going to let the psychologist in the room answer that.
all right, you don't have a Harry in your family, Bill?
Several.
Okay, Paul, what do you think?
Well, so like I used to do what we call qualitative research. Right. So qualitative research is you go out to communities and your interest is in finding out what they think and why they think the way they do. So years ago, we were doing work on childhood diarrhea. This was in, if I remember right, it was Rwanda, but one of those countries. And very often with these studies, when you're working in local communities on health issues, the only people you have who can do your interviews are the local health workers. So I asked them, please go out and find out when children get diarrhea, what does the mother do? And so my interviewers would go back and go out, and the mothers would say, well, when my child gets diarrhea, I stop feeding them drink and food, which is the exact opposite of what they should do. And so my workers could not contain themselves. So when they heard this, they would tell me, yes, so Dr. Paul, I told her immediately, this is what you have to do. And I said to them, okay, and then what happened then? Well, that was when the interview ended. She didn't want to talk anymore. And I said, look, that is there. And I said, that's exactly right. And who can blame her? I said, your job was to go out and understand what they do and why. Your job was not to correct them. And when you corrected them, you shut them down, right? They would have felt disrespected. They would have felt criticized. And so I found that when we had interviewers who could do that, right, who could contain themselves and just be genuinely interested in listening and understanding people, that the mother would then open up. And then, as we did in those days, we would go back and do a second, third, and fourth interview, right? Then they would form a connection. So this was also a situation where, like, you send your interviewers out, they go out with a checklist, they get the questions answered, and that's it. Send out a qualitative interviewer who knows how to listen and appreciate. He comes back with a chicken or a gift or an invitation to dinner or something like that. In other words, they make a connection. And I feel the same way, and I've had the same experience here. is that when you go into a conversation with Uncle Harry or whatever, it should be with like a genuine interest to understand what he believes and why. No criticism of any person, no criticism of any organization, no trying to correct people unless they really put you on the spot, but genuinely interested in understanding why other people think the way they do. And that way we can reform the relationships. And eventually people will, then that once they feel like they've been heard, then they're willing to hear you. But I find that if we go in to vent or to give our righteous opinion and to say what the facts really are, we shut people down. And frankly, the media love to give examples of that. So, for example, when some, scientist or something says that, Donald Trump is stupid or RFK Jr. is an idiot, that all appears on Fox. They love that. They want to hear that because that just feeds the message. You see, these people are disrespectful, they're horrible, don't engage with them. If you do engage with them, that's what you're going to get. So I find that leading with trying to understand people and not be critical and not ostensibly trying to change their minds, but just to understand. And then when you get asked your opinion for your set of facts, I say, I try to lean into this is what I've seen. This is what I observed. Not you're wrong, I'm right, but this is what I saw. And then the idea is you're giving them another opinion. They might go away and change their mind. They might not. But there's no way they're going to change their mind if you lead with venting and saying I'm right and you're wrong. And I find that it's very useful. I mean, even in my own community here, in our own neighborhood, if you come across as, you're not on high, you are really trying to understand how they think the way they do. And here's the other thing about it. People have rational reasons for believing what they do. And sometimes we're wrong. Um, I think about it with vaccines, for example. When I was younger, the diseases we vaccinated against were common. Now they're rare. So what does a mother do? They look at the vaccine and they say this vaccine is to prevent a disease that no one ever sees. The only risk she can see is from the vaccine. So it's not unreasonable for her to have that concern and maybe decide not to vaccinate. In effect, in some ways, we're the victims of our own success. We've made these once common diseases rare, and now the risk to benefit equation for ordinary people has changed. That's a rational approach, but we so often don't try to understand where people are coming from.
So it's important to have that dialogue
Yeah,
to begin to
but from the point beginning, from the point of understanding the other
absolutely.
person and doing so respectfully. So if I'm talking to a mother and mother says, I don't want to vaccinate my kid, it's like I don't have any belief like, oh, then you don't like your kids or you don't love your kids as much as I do. I mean, obviously, yes, she does. You can assume that she loves and cares for her kids as much as I do, my own kids. So then what is going on here?
Yeah.
And to be genuinely interested in understanding that, I think
People
is
want a dialogue with people who listen to.
they want to be listened to,
Yeah.
they want to be understood, and they want to be respected. And if they don't get those three things, they're not interested. And I don't blame them for not being interested.
Well, I think that's a great place for us to end this conversation. But I want to thank you both. I think you're real heroes, and the work you're doing, I think, is really important. And I hope we can spread the word. And I
I
think,
can't thank you enough for the support that you've offered us,
Yes.
for the platform to hopefully reach some more people, and hopefully you'll hear after this, hits the airwaves, other people that are interested in talking to us about this, or we'll come to you to and be happy to have a discussion about these things that we think so important, but it's so we're so fortunate to have people like you in the community that give us this kind of springboard to talk to people. So thank you sincerely very much.
Well, that's great.
And have a happy holiday.
And little did you know you were going to be giving advice about Christmas dinner. So I want to thank you both again. Wonderful talking to you. I hope we can continue to talk as things progress in the future. And I wish you both happy holidays. And I want to thank everyone for listening to us today. Thank you.
Thanks again. Take
Same to
care.
you.